everybody's in a flurry. I mean, Roman Catholics are in a flurry. My DMs are filling up. Tim and I are going back and forth. We went back and forth all morning. I mean, in a friendly, civil way. So we're going back and forth on, well, Vatican I and the Pope, and, can a Pope be a heretic and all that, and blah, blah, blah. So I think I covered those quotes from Vatican I in yesterday's video. And I think I responded to the typical objections like, look, Vatican I says that the Pope and the office of the Pope and its power to be the source of unity and continuity, and it's the source of public visible unity. That's Vatican I's argument. The papacy, right? It says in two places that office will continue, quote, until the end of time. It doesn't say it'll continue to the end of the world and then there's this great apostasy. There's nothing in Vatican I about a great apostasy which allows for 100, 200 years, 50 years, 70 years, whatever, without a valid pope. And if you did admit that, let's say we admitted or we went with the position of these apparitions that, whether it's Akita or whether it's a La Salette, that there could be a mass apostasy in the Roman Church. If we admitted that, then we're admitting that in the last days, the Roman Church and the Roman See loses its public visible unity. But that's one of its key four mark elements. One, Holy Catholic Apostolic, right? So in their position, those constituent elements, which you'll read about in Roman Catholic theology, could never be lost. And what's the essential foundation of the public visible unity? The Roman See. So you see, it's actually impossible to say that the Pope could defect, apostatize, Rome could lose the faith, etc., and be an adherent to Vatican I. And remember, it's supposed to be simple. I mean, the argument of Vatican I is that it's supposed to be clear, simple, and manifest that the Roman See is the sign of the one true church. And so, I'm not worried or upset about Sam. I know Sam's dealing with these issues. He's been dealing with them a long time, so I'm sensitive to that. And if he wants to have a discussion, I just message him so we can have that discussion anytime. One thing that I think Roman Catholics need to do, and I said this to Tim too in DMs, is, you guys should read through Vatican I. I said that to Tim. I said that to Sam. And I'm not being rude or arrogant. It's just a lot of Roman Catholics don't read through those source documents. In Tim's case, he says, well, I'm not primarily focused on dogmatic theology. I'm focused on philosophy. But now let me respond to this whataboutism, because a lot of the Roman Catholics at this point will say, well, you have a bad guy in Bartholomew, according to your own standards. You guys have Elpidophoros. You guys have these bad bishops. The argument is not, we don't have bad bishops, you do. The argument is not, our bishops don't sin, you have sinning bishops. No. It's way more precise than that. The argument is that in Catholic theology, you cannot have a heretical pope or an apostate pope. That's the thing. Why? Because Vatican I's ecclesiology hinges the Roman Catholic system on the indefectibility and the inerrancy of the Roman See. The Roman See cannot teach error, whether publicly and dogmatically or in its normal universal ordinary teaching. And even in its ordinary teaching, although it might err, you're still supposed to submit to that with docility, according to Lumen Gentium and the traditional Roman Catholic moral theology. It's your duty to submit with docility, even in the areas of Catholic theology that might be erroneous. It's not your place to go and correct the Pope. So with those principles in mind, it has nothing to do with saying that the Roman bishop is impeccable. Nobody made the argument that Roman Catholicism is false because we think the Pope is impeccable and Roman Catholics think the Pope is impeccable. No. It's about indefectibility and the Roman See not being liable to teaching error, which is emphasized over and over and over. No one judges the first See. The Roman See is free from error. That actually goes back to things like Dictatus Papae. It goes back to Samacian forgeries and various papal forgeries that are still in canon law, that no one judges the first See. The first See never errs. So we need to, again, set aside this oft-repeated objection, which is a deflection. It's a deflection. Nobody is saying that the Orthodox Church has bishops that don't err or that don't sin. It's that Catholic theology teaches that you can't be So let's talk about these quotes that are being posted here. Orthodox ecclesiology is not Roman Catholic ecclesiology. So if Sam quotes patriarchs saying heretical things, everybody, Nestorius was a patriarch of Constantinople. Many patriarchs have been heretics. It doesn't undo the system of Orthodox ecclesiology and Orthodox theology if you have heretical patriarchs. If the Pope is a heretic, it undoes the Roman Catholic system and dogma. Do you see that? It's that simple. So I don't understand why people don't get this argument. I don't know if they're intentionally misunderstanding the argument and just doing whataboutisms, because it's not a whataboutism. It's critiquing the Roman Catholic theology internally and then saying we don't have that problem in the Orthodox Church. I mean, how do people not? This is the same stuff Lofton has been saying for years. Yeah, dog, y'all got problem bishops too. But what about your problem bishops? The argument is not we don't have problem bishops. How silly is this? The problem is that you have a system which mandates and solidifies certain principles about the Roman See, which could never be the case. In contrast to Tim, it can never be the case that the Roman See goes without its living successors until the return of Christ, that it loses that visible unity. Contrary to Sam or whoever else is arguing that, but you have sinful bishops who teach heresies too. Yes, but we don't hinge everything on one guy. So this is an interesting point too that's raised about tu quoque and the question of double standards. So you have to be precise when something is tu quoque and when something is a double standard. So it really depends on what's being argued, because this can be confusing. It can be confusing because tu quoque is, let's say somebody says, I say, hey, Lofton, the Vatican II teaching about the Roman See never defecting shows that Pope Francis has defected and that therefore Roman Catholicism is not true. And then if Lofton said, but what about your bishops that teach errors? That would be a tu quoque, because the question was given to him and he responds with a question. But the reason that doesn't work is that I'm not bound by the logic of his system, right? The Patriarch of Constantinople is not a pope. Even the pentarchy is not a pope. It's not a five-headed pope. So you can't use your system to critique me, right? So that would be tu quoque. Well, what about your system? You're a hypocrite because you have. So the other position that's not, like when we're talking with Muslims and we're doing an internal critique, and we say, in our theology, in our system, it's not inherently contradictory to say that God is one and three. There's an equal ultimacy there. And then we say to the Muslim, likewise, you have to give an account for Allah's many attributes and his essence. The same metaphysical problem. Do you see that's a comparison between two systems and the internal standards amongst them? It's not a tu quoque, because it depends on what the argument is. If the argument is that you have to justify your system on my system's grounds, right? Or if the argument is, are you using a double standard? For example, a Muslim will say something like, liberal scholarship is my source and my proof for why the Bible's false. But then the same liberal scholarship which says that the Quran is false, is discarded. You see that? Yeah, so an internal critique is not a tu quoque. Exactly. Thank you, Inquisitor. That's what I'm trying to delineate here. And I'm glad this came up because somebody brought this up the other day with the Muslims, and I was like, no, these are different positions here, different things. Well, I don't know what. I mean, just to make this really simple, I mean, I'm not watching Sam's stream, so I don't know what he's arguing, but to make it really simple, like, again, why would I be bound by the Roman Catholic idea of ecclesiology? Well, Sam has not read Vatican I yet. We were just talking about this. So that's why I told Sam he needs to read Vatican I. And I'm not being aggressive or trying to start a fight with Sam or anything. I love Sam. I'm just saying that in the DMs, I said, hey, you need to, if you're interested in Catholicism, you need to read this document. It's about 15 pages. And I said the same thing to Tim Gordon, too, by the way. So I'm not telling Sam or Tim anything different than I'm telling the other ones. Every Roman Catholic should be familiar with these source documents if they want to be Roman Catholic or defend their position. Because a lot of what's floating around today after this Francis debacle is a lot of people making arguments, again, not understanding Vatican I and what it says. So maybe we need to rehearse Vatican I. Let's do that. By the way, if you want to support the stream, you can do so via Super Chats. So the first thing we're going to note about papal teaching, and the reason I'm bringing this up is because I don't think Sam or Tim and I actually had a discussion in DM on this about 6 months ago, so maybe Tim is aware of this now. I'm not sure what his position on this would be, but first mistake we always have to correct with Roman Catholics is that they think that they're only bound by the papacy's extraordinary teaching. And this is patently false. I remember when I was in the SSPX going to the Latin Mass, I used to think this. I used to think, like every tradcat does at some phase, oh, I'm only bound by what the papacy says when it's extraordinary. No, in fact, you're bound by way more than that, and you're bound by the ordinary universal teaching as well. So let's see this. This is one citation here in Vatican I. Wherefore, by divine Catholic faith, all those things are to be believed which are contained in the Word of God in Scripture and tradition, and proposed by the Church as matters of to be believed by divinely revealed, whether by solemn judgment or ordinary and universal magisterium. So you understand that the solemn judgment is the ex cathedra extraordinary magisterium. Ordinary universal magisterium is also dogma and must also be believed. So the necessary propositions to be believed to be saved in the Roman Catholic Church are much broader than a handful of ex cathedra statements. This is a classic mistake that Roman Catholics make. Let's give an example of this. Well, what's something that's ordinary magisterium? Saints. You cannot be a Roman Catholic and deny the sainthood of Alfonso Liguori, Augustine, whoever, because they end up being confirmed by Rome, obviously. And let's think of what would be the case if we could doubt sainthood in the Roman Catholic Church. Well, I could go back, therefore, and doubt all the saints. So the logic of the system would be undone if you could doubt sainthood in the Roman Catholic system. And that's why eventually Roman Catholic theologians tended to say, sainthood is magisterium. Ordinary universal magisterium. Let's see, because I think this statement is said again. There's another statement about ordinary teaching. It might be in one of the encyclicals. But you get the point here because it's still pointing out that you have to believe this. Now, there's also, Denzinger has two other statements. I can't believe I remember that. So here's Denzinger 1792, but 1792 is a repeat of Vatican I. This is the statement that we just read in Vatican I. And there's three more in Denzinger that state that you have to believe also beyond that the decisions of the Roman college as well. So it is in the 1800s. I remember this much. It's getting into this. It's phrased something like, there's also a condemned proposition. It's a condemned proposition that you only have to believe what is in the extraordinary teaching. I'm going to find this because this is really important. I know where I put it. Let's see. Is Vatican I infallible? Or Vatican II infallible? And I listed these underneath it. That's where it is. I can't believe I remembered 1792. Okay. We come down here. This doesn't have the Denzinger statements, but it does have. So Pius XII in C. De Legilis says that even if you think the Pope is wrong, you're bound by his statements. Pius XI in his encyclical Casti Connubii, this condemns the proposition that you're only bound by what you think is, quote, magisterium. Let's pull that up. These are just reaffirmations of the point that I was making. So it's Casti Connubii 104, I think it was. Therefore, let the faithful be on guard against the overrated independence of private judgment and the false autonomy of human reason. It is quite foreign to the bearing of a name of Christian to trust in his own mental powers. To imagine that the church sent by God to guide and teach all nations is not conversant with present affairs and circumstances, or that they must obey only in the matters which has been decreed. Do you see this? By solemn definition, as though her decisions might be presumed to be false or insufficient. Quite to the contrary. You are bound by all the teachings on faith and morals of the Roman Pontiff, not the ones that are only so-called solemn dogma. Right there. Casti Connubii 104. And let me find the one about Roman College. You are bound by... 83. While in truth we laud these men with due praise that they confess the truth and their obligation arises from the Catholic faith, blah, 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 that they do not wish to confine the obligation by which Catholic teachers and writers are absolutely bound only to the decrees of the infallible judgment, C 1722. But you are also bound by all of the other things. So 1683 is referencing 1722. The obligation by which Catholic teachers and writers are absolutely bound is restricted only to the matters that are infallible and the dogmas. This is a condemned proposition. 1722. These are the condemned propositions of Pius IX in the syllabus of errors. So it is a condemned proposition that a Roman Catholic is only bound by the infallible teachings of the magisterium and not the universal ordinary teachings, or not the ordinary teaching. All right, next one. $16.98. Nor do they blush to profess and publicly, openly the axiom and the principle of heretics, from which various perverse opinions and errors arise. For they repeatedly said that the ecclesiastical power is not by divine right distinct from the civil power, and the distinction and independence of the civil power cannot be preserved without the essential rights of the civil power being invaded and usurped by the church. That's a quote from the liberals. We cannot pass over in silence the boldness of those who do not endure sound doctrine and contend without sin, that with no loss of Catholic profession, one can withhold assent from obedience to the judgments and decrees of the Apostolic See. This is condemned. So the idea that you can be a good, faithful Catholic and withhold your assent to the judgments and the disciplines, the disciplinary judgments of the Roman See, is a condemned proposition. So you are condemned as a heretic if you believe that in the Roman Catholic Church. And so that's the other ones in Denzinger that I mentioned. Now, I know Denzinger, like Sam Shamoun, knows the Quran and the Hadiths. So anybody who wants to discuss these topics, I'm more than willing to have any kind of dogmatic Roman Catholic discussion. Again, I know these texts like he knows the Quran and the Hadiths. So I'm more than willing to do any kind of deep dive anybody wants on these issues. But as you can see, I gave you 4 Denzinger references and Casti Connubii. So if you want the numbers, Denzinger 1683, Denzinger 1698, Denzinger 1722, Denzinger 1792, Casti Connubii 104. Vatican I, Chapter 3, Section 8. Clear as day. That's why we always say to the Roman Catholic, the tradcats, you can't reject Vatican II. It doesn't matter if it's called a pastoral council. It's confirmed by the Apostolic See. It deals with faith and morals, and it's for the entire Catholic Church. There you go. You have to believe it. You can't reject Vatican II if you're a Catholic. Anyway, how many times have we talked about this? Like a million. I mean, I've literally been sitting here covering Denzinger and tradcat copes and doctrines for how many years? And you notice every time they come to debate, they get demolished and they run off and cry and they won't debate, or they just boot me from their streams. So that's why I don't go on their streams. Okay. But I wasn't really planning on... Now, people... Oh, by the way, yeah, everybody should be aware of Mortalium Animus, because that's one of the other really crucial documents in this, and people should read this if they haven't, because it's really the clearest condemnation. That's the latest condemnation of this stuff from the Vatican. So the last time that the Vatican made a really explicit rejection of multi-faith, interfaith gatherings that I'm aware of was the 1928, I guess it's an encyclical, yeah, Pius the 11th, 1928 Pius 11th, Mortalium Animos. And the whole document, it's not that long. You should read it. It's really a very clear condemnation that the reason that Catholics can't engage, look at this. So, venerable brethren, it is clear why the Apostolic See has never allowed its subjects to take part in the assemblies of non-Catholics. For the union of Christians can only happen in the Roman Church. The one true church is visible to all. It is the mystical spouse of Christ, etc. And so it could never be in communion or allow its members to engage in interfaith gatherings. This whole document, clear as day, is a condemnation of interfaith gatherings. And it's very famous, it's very well known. You know what Roman Catholics say? Oh, well, it wasn't dogma. Oh, but it doesn't have to be dogma for you to follow it. It only has to be normative teaching. And certainly the Pope's encyclicals are ordinary universal normative teaching. In this case, the Pope is speaking on faith and morals. He is speaking as the successor to Peter to the entire church. Who's it written to? The patriarchs, the primates, the archbishops, the bishops, in communion with the apostolic see, the whole world, on religious unity. The whole document is a condemnation, and it says that if you engage in interfaith gatherings, you are an apostate. You have left the Christian faith. You are no longer a member of the mystical body because you have surrendered what is a fundamental doctrine of Christianity, which is that Christ is the only way to be saved. So anybody who wants to come debate these topics, again, I know these documents like Sam knows the Quran and knows hadiths. I mean, I'll go all day long with Denzinger. I mean, you guys have seen my Denzinger, right? I've read Denzinger. I'm not trying to be rude. I don't think Tim or Sam even have Denzinger. So they're not. This is not a position that they're ready to debate. That would be like me saying, "I'm gonna go debate Sam Shamoon on the Quran, and I'm gonna win." No. I know these. I was an insane tradcat for 10 years. I lived this. I breathed this. I dare say nobody knows the tradcat ins and outs in the internet sphere better than me. I mean, there might be some nerd who spent more time in these stupid documents, but when it comes to executing the arguments, I dare say that there's not a tradcat out there that could really hold up to this. Because, I mean, if you take this stuff seriously, you're going to, immerse yourself in all these doctrines and documents. How long was I SSPX or SETA? So I started reading Roman Catholic stuff in 2001. I came into the Roman Church 2003. I was pretty quickly a trad. I didn't really know what was right about who was and wasn't Pope in 2003. I read the first set of Acontis book in 2004 or 5, but I wasn't convinced of it. I just thought, well, there's all these different types of positions that you could have on the Vatican. It took me a couple more years before I started leaning more and more to think that John Paul II was not a valid Pope. But I mean, I was still just, if you're in the SSPX, you just kind of set that issue aside because you think, well, there's not much I can do about it. I'm going to the Latin Mass. Even the Vatican admits that, the Latin Mass is like valid sacraments. So if you're in the SSPX type position, you just kind of don't spend a whole lot of time worrying about it. And you just go to the Mass, right? But it kind of wears at you. And you start thinking, well, but how's this SSPX position actually tenable? And I didn't really think about the SSPX position being untenable until I was confronted with the question of universal ordinary magisterium. So in other words, this Vatican I teaching that you're not just bound by the dogmas. I mean, that undoes this right here, 1698. That ends the SSPX position. The whole SSPX position is premised on rejecting John Paul II's excommunication of Lefebvre. But clearly 1698 says you don't have the right to reject a papal excommunication. You must follow the Pope and the Roman See, the Roman College, in their juridical decisions. And so if that's the case, bye-bye SSPX. You guys are the definition. You are in the Roman system, the definition of schismatic.